Class, MASH. By Anutty. Chapter 61, Literally. Mash was sitting alone in the gardens now. Knowing that he could trust his friends, that they would stick with him despite his fate, troubled him. Since he knew it to be true, it felt like he was more responsible for what happened to them. Though the only person who had been home when he returned had been his brother, the other three having gone out for something. Arthur's obvious concern about his odd behavior upon returning from the guild had only weighed on him more. He tried grilling Mash and his friends for all the details, and had gotten the gist of the story. Jill even told him about the prophecy Ravnica had given them. Blessedly, she kept out the bit about the item. That had been a detail they decided on before returning home. The story they told his brother was that the guild leader was interested in the item, so they sold it to her for some gold and the items from the vault. Plus, it let them get on her good side, which would be useful for their time there. It wasn't a lie, but a gentle stroll around the truth. Although, his brother probably figured out what they were doing, but chose to remain silent knowing he couldn't force it out of them. At least that was one concern abated for now. Night had fallen, but there was no moon out yet. Or maybe it was hidden behind some building. The surrounding buildings were tall enough that they peeked over the walls of his brother's place. It was surprisingly quiet, the only thing he heard was Priscilla's voice. He was trying to split his mind, so he had a small wooden creation in his hand for Priscilla to try and control. Neither of them had any ideas on how to accomplish it, so he just left his mind open for Priscilla to try and figure something out. He had no doubts that she was the expert in this department, and his attempts to try something had blocked her own preparations. All that was happening was they were swapping who had control of his body. It wasn't working, but they were able to switch faster now, and he was able to focus on his thoughts. Did he want to subject his friends to his path? His immediate answer was that he should leave the choice to them, or to treat them like he did his family. That felt weird though. Despite having been separated from his siblings for a while now, it was still easier to share his burdens with them. He was running around in circles with his thoughts and was saved by Priscilla. Just ask them and decide afterwards. You should be focusing on the task at hand. She was irritated with his lack of care and effort, or maybe just because they weren't making any progress. Despite her tone, she did sound correct. Dwelling by himself like this would only cause him more problems. For now, he would do what Priscilla said, and focus on his training. He tried to think about what it was like to multitask, try to imagine he was doing something similar. He also tried switching control rapidly, trying to let Priscilla cling to his creations as she did so. That also seemed futile, it was like trying to move all his limbs separately. It felt like he was going about it wrong and thought about what else he could do. Having spent the better part of an hour with the practice, he was interrupted when he felt Jill teleport within his range. There you are. Why is it that none of the servants knew where you were? It shouldn't be that hard to find the literal monster of the house. Her sarcasm was laid on thickly, though there was a grain of truth to what she said. The servants tended to avoid him, so he might actually be the hardest person to find in the house. What's up? Are the others back already? What? No, how would I know before you anyways? You can literally see the front gate from here. So, what did you want to talk about? And please stop using the word literal. She winced at his remark, though he meant it as a joke. His tone was being affected by Priscilla's irritation, and he had to take a second to separate their minds. It seemed like their training had made the connection stronger, and he wondered if it would weaken or remain as it was now. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound like a brat. But, are you feeling all right? You looked pretty shaken up. Despite his conversation with Priscilla earlier, he was finding it hard to find the words. He didn't know how to share his concerns with them and was unconsciously planning on asking his siblings first. Thankfully, Jill didn't let the silence stretch too long, continuing before it became too unnatural. Look, you do realize the situation our group is in, right? Each of us is carrying our fair share of baggage. So, I can guess what you're worried about. Trust me when I say this, but none of us expected anything different from being in a team with you. Come on, give us a little more credit than that. I mean, just take half a second to consider what you look like, and what your abilities are. That is not even mentioning that you are literally carrying a monster within your body. Enunciating the word literally, Jill sprouted a wide grin. Surprisingly, he felt pleased to have his thoughts being read like a book, finding himself sharing her expression. I was that obvious, hey? Yeah, everyone, your brother included, figured it out. You should be glad that you're terrible at hiding your thoughts. As soon as you left, we were trying to figure out how to broach the topic. But we ultimately decided that you were probably going to overthink it, and that we should just talk to you. Arthur told us that you tended to do that. Mash realized he had been doing exactly that, right up until Priscilla had stopped him. Although, he didn't know why his brother would think that. Mash wasn't like that when he was a kid. At least, he didn't think that he was. Thanks, I think I needed to hear that. Let's go find the others, I have some things I want to tell you guys about. Especially if we plan on sticking together. Feeling genuinely thankful, he was glad that it was Jill, in particular, who found him. She had somehow managed to make the discussion feel more casual, and he knew that the conversation would have been much more serious with the others. It might have been because of her merchant background, but she always felt like a friend, despite her tendency to insult him. She nodded, but asked what he was going to talk about, though he never got the opportunity to answer. He saw Luna and the princesses returning and tabled the discussion for another time. I think the talk is going to have to wait. The three of them noticed him and Jill, waving towards them. He started making his way towards them but stopped when Jill grabbed his arm. Wait, seriously, do you have any idea what you have just done? You can't just tell someone you have something big to say, and then not say it. I am not letting you drag your feet about this. We will have the time to talk once they leave. Speaking so fast that it was kind of hard to understand, she whispered furiously beside him. He only managed to smile awkwardly, fully aware of how he would feel in a similar situation. Instead of replying, he yelled at the approaching group. We got something good, and think it will be good for Nevis. That got their attention, Nevis somehow becoming more jumpy than normal. She might as well have run, her speed walk was probably taking more effort. Constantly throwing out questions, she made her way over. He couldn't answer any of them, barely able to even blink by the time she asked her next question. What is it? An item for someone without a class? Where, how much, what? Stop. It's inside. Here, let me show you. Jill cut her off, seeming to ignore the propriety from yesterday. She then teleported all of them, bringing them to the training grounds they used earlier. She stumbled after doing so, probably draining most of her mana. Mash looked around, astonished by the empty training grounds. It had been completely restored, all of his wooden creations cleared away. How had his brother managed that so quickly? Arthur was sitting there meditating quietly when they suddenly appeared. His brother sprang to his feet quickly but seemed to recognize them, though he did not seem pleased by the situation. Jill apologized to him, but he waved off her concern. Arthur then sent a servant to inform Red and Luke. They didn't start talking about the item immediately, waiting for Luke and Red to arrive. Amara had to forcibly stop Nevis from jumping around, a mix of curiosity and excitement was making her jittery. Once the rest of the group arrived, he pulled out the item, receiving a glare from Nevis for not showing it to her earlier. Their group had decided to let Jill sell the item, expecting her to be the best at it. It's a class-specific growth item. Red shared anxious looks with Mash and Luke, and he just shrugged his shoulders. However, he didn't know what Jill was thinking either. Having expected her to upsell the item somehow, he was a little surprised to hear her present it without embellishment. It didn't seem to matter though, since both princesses were left with their mouths hanging open. Even the paladin looked surprised, though she gave him a glare when she met his eyes. Luna looked confused, and Arthur started explaining the situation to her. How much do you want? Being the fastest to regain her composure, Amara asked the obvious question. It wasn't even up to debate on whether they would buy it, it was just a matter of price. Red had explained what the item meant, and how it worked, so Mash understood the princess's quick decision. An item like this would give someone the option for a class related to it in some way. But that was all it was the chance to get ahead on a class path. The opportunity was priceless and depending on the type of item could be worth a fortune. The only item that was well known was a sword, that would immediately offer someone the young hero class. Normally a class like that wouldn't be offered until someone was level 60 or 100. His brother was probably a candidate to receive that class at his next advancement. Nobles were essentially paying for the chance at getting such a class, so that they might have the opportunity to get more class advancements. Mash was the one to answer Amara, surprising Jill who was ready to haggle. Red had pulled Mash and Luke aside, telling them of a different plan, something Jill probably wouldn't agree with. You can have the item if you can clear Jill's family debts. Watching Jill's reaction, he spoke confidently. Red kicked him in the leg though, and hard at that. We decided that I would get to do that. Red didn't sound angry, but the kick told another story. It had been really hard, but he accepted it. After all, he did steal her spotlight. Amara nodded, agreeing immediately, as if the deal was too good to be true. Yes, that's fine. How much is the debt anyways, and is it with the kingdom? Yeah it is, but it's just under 300,000. Jill reluctantly gave out the information, taking awkward breaks as she replied. He couldn't contain his reaction in the slightest, yelping slightly as he stared at her. The others, even the princesses, seemed stunned by the amount. What in the world? Was your father secretly a king or something? Luke spoke up, his widened eyes belaying his amazement. Clearing his throat to hide his girlish yelp, Mash considered what someone could even do with that much money. It was enough to build a small city if someone wanted to. There was no way this item was worth anywhere near that amount. That should be fine since the debt is with my family. But I guess your mother was the enchanter. What a small world. There was no hesitation in Amara's response. Though, Mash was left gaping like a fish at the amount of gold that just vanished in front of him. There must have been another reason for Amara's acceptance, and he guessed it might be because of her relationship with his brother. That or something to do with Jill's mysterious family. She was probably helping them out, but it still seemed ridiculous. Jill stopped her from continuing, letting them know that she would tell them about it later. Now, he was glad that they were planning on having that talk tonight. There were certainly a few questions he wanted to ask. Chapter 62, The Training Begins. The princesses had left soon after receiving the item. They were excited to let their family know about the mask and would need to get them to clear the debt. Before they left, Nevis had suggested that she might level up early. Apparently it was something that happened more frequently among their family. She was 14, her birthday was only a few days after Mash's own. It was obvious that people would do it since it was relatively easy to level up before turning 15. Mash had killed Jason for an early level, but the goblins had also given one. It would be easy enough for someone like Nevis to find monsters to kill. Her family probably had a few in their castle for this specific purpose. He had asked them about the risk of using her stats early, but she said that it wasn't a worry. She had another item which would influence her class choices, and her family had another method for narrowing her classes. So, she wouldn't need to allocate her stats. In fact, it wouldn't do anything and would be more effective if she used them afterwards. Her methods had bothered him a little because he couldn't understand why those methods weren't made more public. Wouldn't it be better if everyone knew about the methods? Thinking about it, he wasn't so sure anymore. The bandits, and Ellis were prime examples of how problematic powerful individuals can be. He had been ruminating on those thoughts for a while now and knew that he couldn't keep delaying the talk with the others. He had told the others that he wanted to take a bath first, using the excuse to buy himself some more time to think. Though he had been dragging it on now and knew how frustrating that must be for them. Even he had his fair share of questions for Jill. It didn't take long for him to get ready, and he made his way towards the conference room. Originally, he planned on not telling his siblings, but decided that they would want to hear it too. He pushed open the door to the conference room, unsurprised to see everyone already sitting there. They glared at him as he took a seat, clearly frustrated for being made to wait. He didn't bother with greetings or other conversation starters, moving directly to the main points. I need to tell you guys that the class system itself alters your minds. Every class, from the very first one you received, changes you. Try and think about anything that changed when you got your first class. At first, he thought he had changed only after getting his class at 14, but thinking about it, he realized that he had been different before then. The runner class had been the first to corrupt his mind, to change who he was. The others didn't immediately look at him like he was crazy, instead they seemed contemplative, to be thinking back on their pasts. As they thought on it, he continued, hoping that his experience might help them see their own changes. I became more eager to improve and started training a lot more. Also, in some weird way, it made me apathetic towards killing people. For the longest time I thought I was just a freak or a psychopath, and only recently accepted that it wasn't just me. Ironically, it was Priscilla who had pointed it out to me. Even now she tells me when my mind shifts inexplicably. My current theory is that all combat classes change the way you perceive killing, of monsters or otherwise. I wanted to ask you guys how you felt when you first killed someone, I mean another human being. His friends and siblings were a little shaken, though a few seemed to realize what Mash was saying. Arthur for one looked as though he expected this, giving Mash a small nod in acknowledgement. Luna seemed strangely sad, and he was worried for her. When she noticed his glance, her expression fell further. I didn't know you thought of yourself like that. I'm sorry. I should have. She was speaking quietly, and he could only hear her because of the silence that was hanging over the room. He shook his head, when Luna looked at him, dismissing her apology. You don't need to apologize. After Arthur left, you were the only one that kept me on a good path. She didn't say anything in response but started crying a little. Mash didn't say anything else, waiting to see if the others would add anything. I don't remember much from when I got my first class, but I definitely changed after the first advancement. The class forced me to take a creature's soul, and I felt a craving to take whatever was nearest. I was moments away from taking my sister's, but managed to hold myself back. I found a scorpion, and took its soul, needing for something to fill the new void that had grown within me. I didn't feel the slightest amount of remorse, despite having been disgusted with the idea moments before. I thought I was doomed, that I was the type of person who would become a necromancer. It was the real reason I left home and became an adventurer. I needed to get away, and I think I was secretly hoping that I would die as one. Meeting you guys had changed that though, your acceptance of me had meant a lot. He wasn't expecting Luke to be the one to speak. Honestly, Mash assumed that only Jill and Arthur could relate, both having killed people. He knew that Jill had killed a bandit and guessed that Arthur must have killed someone by now. The things Luke said frightened Mash, a chill running down his spine when Luke mentioned becoming an adventurer to die. It was a surprisingly quiet way to kill oneself. For a second, he wondered if he had been hoping for something like that but didn't think it had ever gotten that bad for him. Unable to find the right words, he just put his hand on Luke's shoulder, trying to give him a real smile. Yeah, I felt weird after killing someone. I felt happy, a primal thrill from killing the bandit, from doing it in the same way that he tried to kill me. As soon as the feelings flashed through me, I was able to recognize how wrong it was, how different it was from my own thoughts. It was sickening. Shivering as she finished her recollection, Jill stared down at her hands. Slowly they all looked towards Red, though she didn't need to add her own part. She didn't have anything to say, shaking her head and letting them know. Sorry, but I can't say that I experienced the same thing, though I might be the weird one for it. So, what do we do about it? We don't have a Priscilla to tell us when we're being controlled. Jill spoke up, frustrated with her inability to do anything. She wasn't looking at Mash for an answer, and he didn't have a real solution. Priscilla was speaking in the back of his mind, telling him that they could accept one of her bodies. Not bothering to respond to her suggestion, he offered the group his thoughts on the matter. I have come up with something, but I don't actually know if it will work. I told you guys about dungeons already, but this world should have someone who oversees it. My guess is that they made the classes and can remove them. So, either we become strong enough to surpass them, or at least get them to remove their influence. How long do you think that will take? What if it's too late? What if that doesn't change anything? Letting his concerns be known, Luke questioned Mash's plan. For his part, Mash just stared in silence, unable to come up with any response. That was all he could come up with, and all it really did was push the problem back. It was one of the reasons he didn't want to bring it up, since it would become something that would nag at each of them. Although it was something he decided to do, to share some of his burdens with those willing to carry them. Nobody talked after Luke's questions, trying to find an answer, but only ending up with nothing. There was nothing they could do immediately, and the silence grew heavier in the room. Well, that's a good place to stop for the night. It's getting late and we should all get some sleep. Remember that you guys have training in the morning. Clapping his hands to get their attention, his brother ended the meeting. Somehow, his brother managed to sound confident, even a little resolved. Mash couldn't understand why though, Arthur couldn't solve their problems. Despite being a higher level, Mash knew that he would catch up in level. His brother didn't focus on it, his priorities were elsewhere. For now, they broke up, heading to their rooms to sleep. He was right that they would need to wake up relatively early. Mash still wanted to hear Jill's story, but it didn't seem like the right time for it. There would be time for that talk later. He had woken up relatively early, feeling much better after getting a good night's rest. He was waiting for the others now, eating a full breakfast while he waited. There was a wide variety of food, the butler having prepared it in advance. Although, he couldn't really enjoy the flavor, his thoughts wandering towards the discussion from the night before. The food wasn't enough of a distraction, so he made another wooden creation, trying to train with Priscilla. He wasn't expecting to succeed, just needing to divert his mind. The others woke up in time and found him stuffing his face while playing with a wooden limb. It was a replica of Priscilla, hoping that the shape would make it easier. Jill was the last one to wake up, and they left as soon as she finished eating. They didn't talk about the night before, choosing to avoid any serious topics for now. Instead, they discussed the kinds of items they wanted from the vault. That discussion carried on, right up until they made it to the guild. They were familiar with the path to the guild and had been told which training room they were supposed to go to, so they didn't bother checking with the receptionist. Walking through a narrow hallway, they headed down a flight of stairs. There was only one room at the base of this staircase, and he pushed open the door. Walking inside, he stared around at the perfectly made training grounds. Clear and open, there were several training dummies and weapons sitting in the corner. There were also several pieces of equipment that he had never seen before. There was no one in the room yet, and he didn't expect there to be. There were still a few minutes before their start time, and he didn't think the instructor would arrive early. "Good, you're here already. Then we can go ahead and get started." Mash was startled by the familiar voice, turning, and finding Jack descending the stairs. He was carrying a few objects, none of which looked familiar to him. He could see 5 metal plates, each of a unique color, and 3 blue crystals. The more noticeable feature though, was the training gear he was wearing, and Mash knew that he was not going to like the training today. As Jack got closer to them, he pushed them onto the ground with his presence alone. "Are you our instructor?" Mash couldn't hide the dread from his voice, and Jack's grin was enough of an answer. He couldn't stop from releasing a small sigh, thinking that it couldn't be that much worse than the fight with his brother. There were not that many ways to lose a fight. Chapter 63, Treasure Vaults. "Line up, we are going to start by doing some basic evaluations." Jack sounded like he enjoyed commanding them, a turnaround of his position when the guild master was around. He had been made to act with deference, and Mash thought that he might take out his frustration on them. Still, Mash followed his directions, lining up along one side of the training grounds. He was surprised to see that the floor was covered in grass, or some imitation of it. He was tempted to take off his shoes, to feel the grass beneath his feet. It wasn't something he would normally do, but he was curious to see what this artificial-looking grass would feel like. There were always his hands, but he didn't want to interrupt Jack by bending over and grabbing the grass. "I'm going to have you hit this crystal with the strongest attack you can manage. It will give us a rough estimate of how much damage you can do, and I only want to see an attack you can use in battle. I don't give a damn about a skill that takes an hour to set up. Those are just worthless." Jack spoke while placing the metal plates in a circle, sectioning off a portion of the grounds. Each was still visible, a good bit of the plates were sticking from the ground. The aforementioned crystal was placed into the center of one of the training dummies, and he moved it to the opposite corner of the room. His focus shifted to Jack's words, as he finished his instructions. Honestly, Mash had forgotten that his skills would make it so that his strongest attack would take a long time to set up. If he spent enough time growing out his wooden creations, he might be able to drop a literal mountain on someone. There were stories of the king changing the world, transforming its surface to better support the kingdom. And Mash could manage something similar already. It would take him a lot longer to accomplish, but he had the potential to shape the world, and he wasn't even bronze-ranked adventurer yet. Red went first, her blood dress forming around her body. It grew larger and larger, until he couldn't make out that she was within it anymore. Then it slowly condensed around her, and she was left holding 2 enormous great swords of swirling blood in each hand. She swung them in a cross motion, an attack that would normally be highly impractical. It smashed into the crystal. A wave of blood forming where the 2 blades collided. Immediately, Red turned and looked at Jack, trying to gauge his response. However, Jack gave nothing away, his expression unchanged by whatever information he got. Although, Mash did notice that a crystal in his right hand was glowing faintly. "Go sit in the circle, it will help you recover your mana." Having noticed Red returning to the group, Jack told her what to do. Following his instructions, she stumbled as she entered the space. Something had startled her, and Mash found his curiosity rising. Sadly, Luke got to go next. He walked up to the crystal before growing several times larger, bigger than Mash had seen before. Luke's head was almost grazing the ceiling, and Mash guessed that he could have grown bigger if he wanted. Before, Luke had worn loose clothing that would fill out when he grew, but after his last advancement, he bought magical clothing that could deal with his change in size. It could grow big enough to fit a small giant, so he would be fine at this size. At the size of an ogre, he was 4 or 5 times as large as Mash now. Punching at the crystal, Luke's buffs flared across his body, causing Mash to wince at the sudden influx of light. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel the ground tremble a little. By the time his vision had cleared, Luke was making his way to the circle. His movements were sluggish, having just expended most of his mana. Mash looked towards the training dummy, which was still undamaged, though the ground around it was shaken. Finally, he was called up, glad that he wasn't the last person to go. Originally Mash considered using all of his energy before attacking, that way he would get the bonus from his persist skill, but he didn't think Jack would appreciate waiting for him. Instead, he planned on using Priscilla and handed of his body to her, but before she could attack, Jill called out from behind. "Don't cheat and use Priscilla." "It's not cheating, but can I attack twice?" Jack looked at him, a little confused but gave him a nod anyways. Mash decided to let Priscilla attack first, that way he could use her wooden creations afterward. Once she took control, she raised his hands toward the crystal. Wood didn't sprout from just his hands though, the whole front of his body releasing a bouquet of wooden creations, each a replica of Priscilla that grew bigger as they approached the dummy. By the time they made it across the room, they had grown significantly, but the beak tips grew interconnected, the tip making a loud satisfying crash against the crystal. After her attack she relinquished control back to Mash, who waited for Jack to give him some confirmation. After receiving a small confirmation, Mash started running towards the dummy. He pulled Priscilla's creation back behind him. Without slowing down, he swung his arms in a circle a few feet away from the crystal, but he followed his swing with the wooden creations from earlier. They wrapped around him as he spun, and he released them after making one full rotation. They exploded out, much like the spikes had from Priscilla's whip-like attack against his brother. They crashed into the crystal and the surrounding wall, though he didn't feel the ground tremble like he did for Luke's attack. Again, there was no reaction from Jack, and Mash made his way towards the mysterious circle. As he stepped inside, he felt his energy recovering rapidly, faster even than his meditation could manage. Within a few heartbeats he was completely recovered. "I still think it's cheating to use Priscilla's creations in your attack." Sounding a little snide, Red remarked on his methods. "I shouldn't have to attack without Priscilla anyways, we are basically the same person." He could feel that Priscilla liked that response, though he just used it to argue with Red. They talked a little bit more, Luke mentioning that he would grab plates like these if they were in the vault. Jill teleported into the circle, looking a little miffed that they had ignored her turn. Although her turn wouldn't be particularly exciting, everyone already knew what her most powerful attack was. It was also her only directly offensive skill anyways. It looked like she was going to start complaining, but Jack didn't give her the option for it. "That was pretty good." "Only Jill, and Mash's first attack went above your expected range." Luke was close, and Red and Mash's second attack were about the same. "Those last two were around the average of what I expect from your rank. Now, that I have a general idea of what to expect from you guys, let's go raid the vaults. I'll help you choose some items, and we can start practicing with them afterward." That got their attention more than the results of his little test. Honestly, Mash had thought that their whole group would be above average, at least where damage was concerned, but that clearly wasn't the case. He guessed that made sense, only Jill possessed a specifically offensive skill after all. It did make him worry for the tournament later but figured he could rely on Priscilla in times of trouble. Instead, he followed behind Jack as he led them out of the room, continuing to lecture them on their attacks. Jack was very observant and understood their team's dynamic very quickly. Pointing out each of their roles succinctly, he mentioned the types of items that they should look for. For example, he told Luke to look for a defensive item, just being able to run away wasn't enough. He gave similar recommendations to the rest of them, telling Mash to grab something to burn off his energy. Apparently, there were some items that would let him funnel his energy into it, letting him straddle the line for his persist skill, though it might make him feel sluggish before the skill kicked in. Being low on mana or stamina would do that to a person, and he would effectively be like that the whole time. Despite that, Mash could see the advantage in having an item like that, and Jack mentioned that they usually had powerful bonuses for the mana cost. Jack led them back up the staircase, only to lead them down a different set of stairs. These were narrower, and they had to march in a single file line. They spiraled downwards, further than Mash expected, but eventually they opened into a small space before a large set of double doors. Each door was solid metal, reminding him of the impossible heavy gates of Crawl. Jack opened them easily enough though, letting them into a brightly lit room. At first Mash thought it was lit by light engravings like the rest of the building, but it felt different, and he glanced around the room. It was lit by some of the items in the room, many of them gave off some amount of light. Mash didn't bother waiting for Jack's permission, walking up to the nearest shelf and inspecting the items there. He could vaguely hear his words behind him, but his thoughts were focused on the items before him. Anything in this room is up from grabs. If you pass through another doorway, then you gotta check with me first. Jack's yells echoed through the room, the others had also dashed into the vault. It was an impressive sight, shelves reached up to the ceiling, each filled with hundreds of items. Honestly, he kind of expected to feel a call to a particular item, for something to reach out to him. That seemed to be how most things had been working thus far, and he grew a little ashamed at the disappointment he felt. It wouldn't work like that. So he started with item before him. There was a short plaque next to each, offering him a little information on the item. It was a weapon, a dagger of some kind, though all he saw was the hilt of the weapon. From the description, he gathered that it was like Jill's armor, which meant that it was useless for him. He set it back down and moved on to the next, deciding that he would ask Jack for recommendations later. After a few minutes of doing it, he was surprised when Jill saddled up beside him. "What are you looking for?" He looked at her, trying to find what item she picked but couldn't find it immediately. "Go ahead and brag about what you found, and I'm looking for something to pour my energy into, like Jack recommended." "Well, since you asked so nicely. I found a paired item for my ring. It felt like I was drawn to it, like what you hear about in fairy tales. The thing said that it had the same effect, but I think it will do something special with pairing. Jack already gave me the green light too." Sounding eager to share her information, she held her hand out in front of his face. He saw the two rings she mentioned, the old and new, which did indeed look like a pair. He had forgotten about the foresight ring, making a note to try and remember all the items they had. They were gathering quite the supply of useful items. Standing in a room like this really put some things into perspective. Would Jill's family debt be considered large for successful adventurers? It seemed so big now, but the items in this vault would eclipse that amount. Even with Jill's help, he wasn't making much progress in finding an item. He was hoping for storybook moment, but decided it was time to ask Jack for some direction. Chapter 64, "Okay, that's a good item." Mash approached Jack reluctantly, mainly because of the smugness of his expression. He looked like he was waiting for this moment, knowing that they wouldn't be able to sort through the items themselves. The amusement in his tone was thick. "Not finding anything to your liking?" "No, but you knew that. So, where should I go look?" Mash's irritation was obvious, even if he tried to hide it. Though Jack didn't seem to mind, chuckling softly as he headed towards one of the side rooms. "Don't be so put off, kid. To be young and foolish, are what it means to be an adventurer. I only get to be in this position after first having been in yours." Jack turned his head back and smiled at them, though his gaze seemed far off. Mash found himself liking the Vice Guild Master. His attitude and presence made it easy for others to relax around him. It was a bit strange considering his size and appearance, resembling a barbarian from the East. For a second, he thought it might be because of a skill, but decided that thinking like that was needlessly paranoid. Priscilla would warn him about something external affecting his mind anyways. Maybe the events of the past few weeks were getting to him more than he wanted to admit. The new room, that Jack had taken them to, was filled with items. The organization wasn't as neat as the main room. Piles of items were laying in the corners and only a few rested on small tables that were crowding the floor. It seemed more like a room meant for junk, than magical items of untold power. These items are less than practical, the stuff in the corners is junk. All they do is feed the items on the table's mana, look through those. If you find your mana running too low, then step out. Jack spoke, stopping at the entry and prompting him to enter. Mash entered after Jack gave his warning but wasn't sure he wanted this kind of item. Jack had proposed it to him, so he wanted to see what they would do, but it seemed unnecessary. If he ever needed to straddle the line of his persist skill, then he could simply let Priscilla use up his energy on making new bodies. She could essentially function as one of these items. Still, he listened to Jack's recommendations. Each of them had given him a rundown of their skills, and he trusted in the judgment of someone with as much experience as Jack. As soon as Mash stepped into the room he felt the drain on his energy. It reminded him of getting pricked by an insect, or in this case, thousands of insects. It was not pleasant, and he hoped that the items wouldn't feel like this once he attuned to them. Although, with his unique condition, he was a little curious to see what attuning to one of these items might do. He walked up to the nearest table, and Jill followed along beside him. The mana drain in the room probably bothered her too, but she was just as curious as he was to see what these items would do. The first item was a type of bracelet. It was made of some bluish metal that seemed dull compared to all the glowing items in the previous room. Despite the coloring, the effect of the item looked incredible. It would drain a person's mana consistently but would also raise the total amount of mana a person had. It was a slow process, but for people that could live near forever, the potential payout was incredible. There were also some tips on how to use the item, most recommending them to attune to the item at night and to break the attunement every morning. Though that seemed impossible for him, as he still hadn't figured out if he could break his attunements. There wasn't a strict limit on the amount of items someone could attune to, but it was generally accepted that a person could only attune to one item of each type. For example, he wouldn't be able to attune to another storage item anymore, but that didn't bother him too much since the space was growing with him. This bracelet was not a good choice for him anyways. Priscilla would essentially accomplish the same thing if she grew more bodies. He moved on to the next item, which was a crown of brownish metal, though it also didn't provide him any real benefit. As he moved from one item to the next, he realized that most of these would help him raise his stats and were ultimately less effective than Priscilla. He heard Jill let out a sigh beside him, either wishing for one of the items for herself, or similarly bored of the unexciting variety. Rather than pouring through the rest of the items one at a time, Mash yelled back to Jack who was still standing at the entryway. "Jack, do any of these items do things other than raise my stats? Check the last 2 rows, but don't ignore those stat gain items. Most people eventually try and get 1 or 2 before they hit level 100. It's good for people who don't want to waste decades training, cuts the time of training by more than half." Despite telling Mash where the more unique items would be, he still gave him the kind of advice he would expect from a mentor. "Thanks, but I already have something that does that, so they aren't really for me." Mash saw Jack looking at him, his hand was raised to his chin like he was lost in thought. Probably didn't expect him to have so many things already, though it was one of the benefits of hopping from dungeon to dungeon and surviving. The items further in the back 2 rows certainly looked more unique, most were made of colors and shapes that seemed strange. The first thing he walked up to be a pair of flower-shaped earrings, each seemed to be made of different colored metal, one was a pure black and the other an unblemished white. Almost wanting to ignore the item, he read the effect when he heard Jill gasp beside him. "Mash, this is..." "No, stop, I don't want to hear it. I really don't need or want more flower tattoos." Turning to face her, he saw that she was not amused by his interruption, or with his refusal of looking at an item because of its appearance. Though that wasn't fair since he did read the item's description. After reading the effect, he wanted to ask Jack if he could change the design or something. Sighing, he knew that Jill was right. This item was named, and the plaque called them the earrings of the Flower Queen. They were items that would strengthen the mind, based on the amount of mana they had consumed. Doing things like making it easier to stay calm, or to organize disordered thoughts. It would also use the stored mana to block spells or effects that would intrude on his mind and worked with more efficiency than traditional defenses. It could help us in splitting your mind and sharing your body. Priscilla sent him the message, but he had already reached that conclusion. Though she wasn't done speaking, and continued when she noticed his irritation. "I only sent it because I could tell you were dismissing the item for idiotic reasons." Mash didn't need or want to be lectured inside his head, so he set the item down, agreeing to take it if there was nothing else for him. Jill had already moved on to the next item, and he walked hurriedly to get to her. Her reaction didn't seem particularly good, and he figured the item wasn't desirable. The item was a crown of sharp angular metal, that looked like it would cut into him for wearing the item. He read the description, Jill already moving to a different item. It wasn't a named item, and relatively little was written about it. The only known effect it reported was that it would suppress pain and fear completely, feeding on those emotions along with a person's mana. It sounded like a cursed item, and he knew that his inhumanity skill was already helping him ignore things like pain. He realized that, back when he cut off his hand against the bandits, that decision having been unnaturally easy for him. It wasn't an item he wanted or needed, so he moved on to the next one. This process repeated until he was left with only two real choices. One was the earrings from earlier, while the other was made from a wyvern's scale. White with a bluish tint that appeared at the edges, the scale thrummed slightly as he held it. There wasn't much information on the item, other than that it improved one's control over lightning. It would drain his mana and store it as lightning mana and was recommended for a lightning mage. Despite not having a skill for it, Priscilla suggested that he would be able to use some lightning magic with her help. It was highly compatible with both of them, and it would make it easier for her to use her magic through Mash. Well, he was already a weird hybrid of unknown monsters, throwing a wyvern into the mix wouldn't change much. Plus, it had the bonus of not being a flowery accessory. With his decision made, he moved to present the item to Jack. Looking at Jack's face, Mash felt his heart sink. Even before he heard his reply, he somehow knew he would end up with the earrings. Sorry kid, but the wyvern scale isn't one of the options. Too valuable and can be used for making a bunch of other shit, so you're going to need to find something else. Mash hoped that Jack was making a joke, but his expression said otherwise. Fine. What about the earrings? He pointed towards them and was unsurprised to see Jack nod his head. Yeah, you can take those. But it's worse than even the stat items, not to mention its design. Are you sure about that? Items that improve your concentration and focus are pretty common after all. No, it should be fine, I think it might help me in a unique way. Not wanting to mention relinquishing control of his body to a monster, he decided to keep its specific purpose to himself. Arthur had suggested that most people wouldn't be glad to hear that he was giving his power to a monster. Mash agreed with his brother's conclusion, avoiding letting Jack and the guild know about that part of Priscilla. He did need to tell them about her, and Jack had been very surprised to see her. There was a registration process that he needed to go through, which mainly involved signing some papers, and agreeing to be held responsible for Priscilla's actions. He didn't really care much about the item's effect, only that Priscilla said that it could help him with splitting control of his mind. Hopefully, it would work, and he could start mixing their abilities as he wanted. So, he walked over and grabbed the earrings. Quickly taking them out of the room, he made his way towards an empty corner of the vault. Jill placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. It could be worse, at least it wasn't a dress or a skirt. You might as well be condemning me, saying it like that. He shivered at the thought of finding a magic item that was perfect for him, but would require him to wear a dress. No, he would never do that, even if the item gave him unlimited power. If that reality ever came to pass, he would just give the item to Luna, Jill, or Red. They could do whatever they wanted with unlimited power, he would settle for anything else. He could feel Priscilla's thoughts without her saying them, and he stopped her before she could offer a retort. Knowing deep within his heart, he would wear a dress if it offered him unlimited power. Sighing, he dismissed the awful image Priscilla sent him, he didn't want to see himself wearing a dress. Not entertaining that train of thought any longer, he found a place to sit in one of the corners of the room, ready to begin the attunement process. Jill hovered around him, obviously worried about him. Are your ears even pierced? Chapter 65, Flowery Thoughts. No, but it doesn't matter. Once I attune with them, they will probably become tattoos. I'll just jab them in and attune them, then heal it up afterwards. Jill just looked at him like he was a fool, but she didn't say anything as he started. Only when he brought the first up to his ear did she stop him. Blocking his hands, she grabbed the earrings, speaking anxiously. Let me do it, even if it is temporary, I can at least make sure they line up. Well then, do your worst. Joking, he tried to get her to relax. She seemed strangely wound up about this, and he didn't mind letting her handle it. He regretted it as soon as she leaned closer to help him. He had been around Jill and Red so much, that he had gotten used to them, but in moments like these, he realized that they were still very beautiful. Jill for one, had only grown more attractive after receiving her recent class. The changes having made her overall appearance more feminine, giving her an otherworldly allure. So, he sat, trying desperately to not let anything show on his face. From the corners of his eyes, he caught a smug grin on her face. She was messing with him, and he still couldn't manage to hide his expression. Instead, he swapped with Priscilla, telling her to maintain a calm expression. Mash ignored Priscilla's irritation, deciding that he would rather deal with her than Jill right now. Once Jill finished, she tapped his shoulders. They're done. Priscilla, you can let Mash out now. How did you know? Priscilla asked the question for him, and he was surprised to hear the words. They were a broken mess, each word came out in a jumble, and the sentence had no pauses either. But the intention got across, Jill giving her a fast reply. The way you look at things changes too much. You narrow your eyes a lot, whereas Mash's gaze generally seems stupider, more blank. Now that wasn't necessary. Mash responded, taking back control of his body. Decidedly ignoring the look Jill gave him, he started attuning to the items, only then noticing the cold metal that hung from his ears. They were maybe half a finger long, the flower hanging from a small chain that hooked into his earlobe. The searing pain of attuning to an item came, he could feel it, though it wasn't where he expected. Rather than on his ear, it happened just beneath them, closer to his neck. It didn't hurt as much as the necklace had, and he slumped in relief. Well, at least they match. Handing him a mirror, Jill looked over the tattoos telling him what she saw. He used the mirror to see for himself. Each of them did look the same, a white flower that was outlined with thick black lines. It almost seemed like they were glowing, though more faintly than even his eyes. They weren't draining his energy like he expected them to, it seemed like it would only happen when he wanted. That was a relief, although he didn't notice any benefits either, or figured that it would only activate once he gave it some energy. He was a little reluctant now, but it was too late to change it either way. Really, he should have been more concerned earlier, this was just pointless conjecture now. Pushing his worries back, he channeled a trickle of the energy into the new tattoos. His vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to shift. It felt almost like a teleportation, or maybe it was closer to the experience of advancing a class. Either way, he felt like he was both separate and connected to his body. Instinctively, he knew that he was looking at himself, at a depiction of his body and soul. Spreading out from where he was standing, he was surrounded by a plain of grass and flowers. It was clear the space was depiction of himself since there was an enormous wooden tree in the center of the plain. It was marred with black scales and lines, and in the distance, he could make out the markings of the great beings floating in the sky like moons. The snake's symbol was a black formless void that shone like a dark sun, and the other seemed like an enormous planet. It was covered in life, forest, and oceans marring its surface. The unnatural clouds that existed at the edges of his space, pulsated with an energy that reminded him of classes when they were offered to him. Even Priscilla was separate, like birds she flew around in the sky. Despite the awe-inspiring sight, he was focused on himself. A feeling of freedom rushed him, of bonds being broken, of a mind that had been corrupted being freed. He gained something for a moment, a control over his mind and body that felt entirely too right. For a moment there was no other influence, not Priscilla, not the marks, and not the class. It was there, only for a fraction of a second, but it was there. The freedom that he never knew existed, that he could no longer be without. Then it was gone, and he returned to his body, bound by all the chains and manipulations of the world around him. As his senses came back to him, he saw the others looking at him anxiously, even Jack watching nervously. Despite their attention, he was focused on something else and stared blankly beyond them, remembering that surreal feeling of freedom. He needed that, but had no idea how. Feeding the item more mana wasn't doing it, the effect must have been due to his strange attunement process and wouldn't be a repeat. None of them could know what he just experienced, not even Priscilla. His situation felt so wrong now, he was disgusted by the number of forces that were limiting him. Now, he knew the truth though. What every person was missing out on, the freedom that should be his. How had he ever been fine with his present state, with slowing his pace? That couldn't remain the same, he needed that freedom again, and there was only one way for him to achieve it. He needed to get stronger faster, not slow down and train. There were 2 dungeons that he could access, each was fairly large and would be a fast way to gain levels. Rather than worry about clearing the dungeon, or harvesting items, he could just kill monsters. One dungeon was within the city itself, and he might be able to sneak in. There should be some other things available too, this was the capital after all. He remembered seeing a coliseum, which meant that he could probably fight monsters there as well. There was the tournament next week too, that wouldn't gain him any levels. Losing early might be the best strategy for that, but it would depend on the rewards. Hello, Mash? What happened? Waving her hands in front of his face, Red broke him from his trance. He took a small breath, needing to find the right words to say. Nothing, the item just did more than I expected it to. I'll tell you about it later, I want to start training. That's a good attitude to have, let's just hope it stays that way. Jack spoke loudly, as if to remind everyone that he was still here. Leading them back to the training grounds, everyone shared what items they picked up. Jill's new ring compounded the effect of her previous one and should give her more time to react to lethal attacks. Although she didn't know what the unique connection would do. Luke found an item that would let him grow his mana, much like the one Mash had seen earlier. The major difference was this would do so by draining ambient mana, rather than the mana of the user. It sounded like a strictly better alternative. Red grabbed a crystal that glowed vaguely. It shone with a blood-red light, that made Mash feel a little sick as he looked at it. She said that it would boost her abilities but didn't specify exactly how. Once they got to the ground, Jack had them start running some drills. It was a basic teamwork exercise, and he lectured them whenever it was necessary. Jack was a good teacher, and Mash was surprised to find the training surprisingly pleasant. There was no needless fighting, instead it felt more like grueling physical labor than a dangerous fight. Time flew by quickly, as he had fun learning of new methods to fight. Jack's advice was abstract, and he left it to the group to figure out how to act on it. Only correcting them on mistakes after they made an effort. Despite the enjoyment and benefit of the training, he was distracted, remembering the momentary feeling of freedom. They sparred just before the end, but not with Jack like he expected. Instead, they fought one another in groups of 2, and were told to figure out what the best combinations were. Mash had teamed up with Red at first, thinking that their creation skills would make them better able to fight together. However, they ended up getting in each other's way, and their attacks left them vulnerable to Jill's teleportation since they were trying to avoid one another. Jill and Mash worked the best together, her rings having indeed given her a greater benefit than they let on. She now had a little bit of foresight for all attacks that would hit her. Normally, someone would only receive a skill like that after level 100 or 150. The items would sell for a lot, but she no longer had the need to worry about that as much, with her family debts being clear. The items let her avoid any of Mash's large attacks that got too close to her, and with Priscilla's high-level control of his wooden creations, he could make gaps for Jill to attack in. Mash worked well with Luke as well, but only after his persist skill activated. The compounding buffs having artificially raised his level significantly. Red and Luke worked well together too, her magic being well suited to take advantage of his buffs, and the healer combination let them shake off any damage that Mash and Jill could manage. The sparring was enjoyable, finally being able to test out their abilities against one another. As training came to an end, and they were cooling down with some drinks, Mash decided that it was a good time to ask Jack about leveling. The others listened to the discussion too, interested to know how adventurers gained levels within the city. Apparently, there were a few missions that would have them fight surrounding monsters, and there were always the dungeons too. Mash wanted to go to the dungeon, but he would need to convince the others or find a way to sneak by the guild, which sounded impossible. There was one other method that interested Mash, though Jack ran over it quickly. He didn't seem very fond of the coliseum, but he explained when Mash prompted him for more information. The coliseum was available to adventurers, and they could find fights in it. However, Jack warned them that it wasn't easy, and many adventurers died in those fights. They would have to fight alone, and could run into any monster within their rank. If they won too often, they would be forced to fight a monster above their rank. Which for Mash, would be a monster that was meant for someone closer to his brother's level. Still, it interested him since it was an option that he could do immediately. His brother wanted him to remain in the capital, but Mash didn't want that anymore. Although he didn't want to betray his brother's trust either, so he would find another method. If he surpassed his brother's level, then that would prove that he could take care of himself. Arthur and Luna were worried about his safety, so he just needed to show them that he could keep himself safe. The Coliseum, tournament, and nearby dungeons would have to be enough. There were levels in this city, he just needed to claim them. Chapter 66, The First Step. It was late into the evening when they finished at the guild, and Mash wanted to head straight for the Coliseum, but knew that there were still a few things he wanted to do first. He wanted to try splitting his control with Priscilla again, having gained a little insight when he got a glimpse into himself. For now, he made his way back to Arthur's house, having a small conversation with the others. What happened when you got the item? Jill did not forget about his promise from earlier and reminded him of the topic. Needing to ask them anyway, Mash didn't mind letting them know. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but I was freed. From everything, the classes, the marks, the contract, and even Priscilla. I can't even begin to describe how incredible that truly was. I just know that I want to experience it again, and I want you guys to as well. Hesitating about bringing up the next part, he paused thinking about how to best word his request. How? Surprisingly, Luke spoke, sounding oddly desperate. Meeting his eyes, Mash waited for Luke to continue. Despite his mask, Luke seemed to get the gesture. You guys didn't experience it, but Leah's charm skill was horrible. And even with last night's discussion, I can barely even tell what my class is doing to me, but the thought of being controlled is terrifying. I will do what it takes to get free. Despite shivering as Luke spoke of Leah, by the time he finished speaking, resolve was painted on his face. Jill nodded along, though Red looked a little more nervous. Though Red managed to sound calm as she questioned him. What did you have in mind? We need to keep leveling. I don't mind the training and we can continue that, but I'm going to sign up at the Coliseum tomorrow. After the tournament, I want to start doing the nearby dungeons, not to clear them but to fight monsters. Mash didn't let any anxiety bleed into his voice, this was something he would do even if they didn't agree. There was a risk to doing things this way, not to mention that he would have even less time to rest. He expected some pushback, but they all agreed. Even Red, who seemed hesitant earlier, agreed with his plan. If we're waiting until after the tournament to enter a dungeon, that will still give us 2 weeks to train. Red explained her reasoning after Jill prompted her. With the group's agreement, he was glad that he didn't need to go about it alone. The guild wouldn't have let him enter a dungeon by himself, so he would have needed to sneak in. Though from his past 2 experiences he figured that would be easy, the guild didn't seem to watch the entrances very carefully. Instead of a firm rule, it felt more like advice, something that was meant to keep them safe. The discussion had continued, talking about what else they could do to gain levels, and Red decided that she would check the guild's mission board later. There might be a few missions for killing nearby monsters. Once back to the house, Mash broke off and headed to the training area. The others went to eat dinner, but he wanted to get started with Priscilla. He was hungry, that feeling never changed though, and he grew used to feeling its pull. Nobody was in the training ground, and he made his way to the center, while telling Priscilla of his plan. We are too separated still. I noticed that, when I attune to the item. Your mana is less a part of me than these items are. Yes, that is obvious. I do not possess your energy and am struggling to match it when not in control of your body. Somewhat expecting her words, he didn't say much more. Instead giving her permission to access his mind. I got that, just check my thoughts and learn what I want to try. After reading through his thoughts, he could feel her contemplating the suggestion. In the end, she sent him uncertainty, but since he had accomplished something similar before, it should be possible again. Sitting against the ground, he crossed his legs like he did when he first succeeded. Back when he really tried meditating for the first time, when he pushed his mana out of his body and drew in the ambient mana. He would do the same again but try and pull Priscilla herself into his mana core. For her part, she needed to empty her mana, that way she could better acclimate to his energy. As he started the meditations, he investigated Priscilla's thoughts to see what risks she had thought of. That was the real reason, he let her look into his mind. He wanted to be aware of what risks she could think of, but it seemed like she thought it was mostly harmless. If they succeeded it would fundamentally change them both, but failure should only mean that their situation wouldn't change. It was an all or nothing situation. The only real risk was that she didn't know what changes they would experience if they succeeded. They ended up discussing the implications of the transformation for a while, his brother having even come down to check on him. Mash waved him off, needing to maintain his focus on the task before him. He pushed against his energy, much like he had done before. Ejecting it from his body to open the pathway for Priscilla. His mana core was larger now, and it was taking longer to start the process. Opposite to his speed, Priscilla only took a few moments to eject her mana, and he could feel her empty vessel beside his core. She couldn't do anything else at this point, the rest of the process falling on his shoulders. He tugged on her vessel, much like how he would interact with pure mana. Similar to how he had resisted others' mana, he was doing the opposite now, making it easier for Priscilla's vessel to enter his core. Pain shot through his chest, and he only managed to maintain control of himself because of the new earrings. Their effects noticeably changing the amount of pain, or at least his perception of it. There was more though, and images, memories, and feelings flashed through his mind, pounding against the inside of his head. The connection with Priscilla was growing stronger, and he knew that he was receiving those things from her. The earrings were helping deal with them as well, he could feel them consuming the errant thoughts and feelings along with his energy. It stopped him from getting overwhelmed, limiting what actually passed into his mind. That was only a part of the problem though. There was an inexplicable pain that bloomed within him. Even his item's paltry attempts to contain it seemed pointless. It felt like he was replacing his guts, and he didn't know if he could maintain his consciousness without the item. Although, he was able to continue now, and pushed forward, despite Priscilla's warnings. Stop, and try again in the future, you are too weak to complete the process. It was weird to hear Priscilla sound concerned, her voice usually sounded apathetic in the messages. Her words didn't stop him, if anything, they did the opposite. Weakness was the biggest chain that bound him, that stopped him from becoming free. Normally, he might have taken her advice, but not now, not for this. He wouldn't let his weakness stop him and pushed forward. Then it came, a feeling of wholeness, of filling his core and letting it become something more. He could feel his core changing, and Priscilla seemed to be experiencing a change of her own. The pain passed slowly, but it did vanish, and he opened his eyes to the world, feeling like a new person. He stared at another pair of eyes. Luna's face was inches from his own. He fell backwards, wincing as his hands touched the ground. Checking them, he saw cuts along his palms. He must have been clenching his fists unconsciously, hard enough to tear his skin at that. He was covered in sweat too and felt moisture running down from his eyes. Moving his hands to wipe his eyes, he wondered about how he must look to Luna. Thankfully, his friends weren't here, only Luna and Arthur were watching him carefully. As he brought his hands down from his face, he saw blood. Tears of blood? What had happened to him? What were you thinking? What did you even do? Luna broke free of her stupor and rushed to help him. He felt her healing magics run through him but didn't have a response for her. She looked tired, and it seemed like she had been crying. While Arthur didn't look like he had been crying, his brows were creased from worry, or maybe that was anger. Waiting for Mash's response, his brother seemed to be containing himself. I tried to get the thing with Priscilla working. Mash didn't have much more to say, still unsure of what he had actually done. He sent Priscilla a message and received a response quickly. She mainly told him of the changes to her own body, of her greater affinity to wood mana now. There were more changes but that was the first thing she noticed. Similarly, she informed him that he had an affinity to lightning mana now and might get the ability to use the magic soon. If he had the Wyvern scale, he would have been able to do it already, and with significantly more control and power. Needing to check on his own condition, he started using his mana territory to examine his own changes. Check your status and let me know what happened. The voice of reason, Arthur gave him an instruction that should have been unnecessary. He was about to do just that but stopped as he noticed Luna's stare. She was looking at him unblinkingly, and only responded when she met his eyes. Your eyes are different. There was a little awe in her voice, though he heard no fear. He would check on that later, for now his status, and focused his thoughts inward. Name, Mash class, Scale Wood Devourer. Level, 40. Health, 1000/1000. Energy, 1139/1710. Fortitude, 100. Endurance, 71. Strength, 71. Agility, 72. Intelligence, 100. Wisdom, 66. Charisma, 32. Free stats, 0. Skills, Persist, Mana Wood Creation, Inhuman Hibernation, Mana Territory, Unnatural Energy, Unnatural Monster Core, Inhumanity, Wooden Body, Carnivorous Tree. Unnatural Energy, Unnatural Monster Core, Passive and Unnatural Mana Core has fundamentally altered your body, fusion with a monster has given you access to its potential. Stamina and Mana combine to become energy. Your inhuman body is better able to handle the changes to your core. Current bonus, plus 35% efficiency. Inhumanity, passive giving up your humanity has improved your body, improving your physical control, natural defenses, animalistic intuition, and mana control. The changes were more subtle than he would have liked but understood that they were benefits. The efficiency of his energy improved, and the line about gaining access to Priscilla's potential interested him. It probably meant to allude to his new lightning affinity but sounded like that wasn't all it did. Even his inhumanity skill changed, but that might have been from earlier since it related to improved mana control which could have happened when Priscilla took control of his body. He should check his status more often but hadn't bothered since there hadn't been any level ups recently. He wanted to run some tests, and even check his eyes, but was stuck explaining what had happened to his siblings. It was clear that they had stayed awake all night out of concern, and he owed them an explanation. After sharing what had transpired, he ended up receiving lectures from both of them, but it was clear that they were just talking out of concern. He told them that there was no real danger, Priscilla having told him as much. That didn't seem to matter, and he was chastised harshly. It was hard to focus on their lecture, as he was having another conversation with Priscilla at the same time. She was excited, explaining to him about the changes that she could notice. This was a more complete connection than the one she formed earlier. They gave each other more now, more even than the simple mana affinities. Each of their minds were strengthened, and she was now producing energy instead of mana as well. Furthermore, his energy was denser now, meaning that he could use it more quickly. With only a little training he should be able to make wooden creations as fast as she had before. That excited him, but he was even more curious to see what she could manage now. Chapter 67, Priscilla's Lightning. Mash wanted to start training immediately but was convinced to clean himself first. His siblings were not very keen on his appearance, and seeing himself in the mirror now, he agreed. The change to his eyes was relatively minor, and he would need to change his mask a little to fit them. They both matched now, a combination of the two greater beings, and Priscilla's eyes from before. His pupil was a narrow triangle, with parallel white lines spreading out from the edges. A faint glow shone from his snake-like pupil, made more noticeable due to the blackness that surrounded it. That was the biggest change to his appearance, though it was not what his siblings were talking about. He really did look like a mess, worse even than a beggar might. His clothes were obviously damp, his sweat having made it stick closely to his body. It was as if he had walked through a rainstorm. Though his clothing was only one problem. Streaks of blood rolled down his face, his eyes having bled during their transformation. Even now red marks marred his skin and clothing. Similarly, his hands were stained in blood, having used them to wipe his eyes earlier. He started to clean himself, spending a little longer in the bath than he needed. By the time he got out, the water had become thick with muck. Once he was satisfied with his cleanliness, he left the bathroom putting on some training clothes. A simple grey-colored shirt and pants, both made of a sturdy cotton. The servants were out and about already, the early morning preparations having started. So, it wasn't hard for him to find someone to clean his mending clothes. With that out of the way, he made his way back to the training ground, ready to begin some drills with Priscilla. There was still training to be done, and they didn't have morning training with Jack today. He was only available 3 times a week, and they decided it would be better to space the training out. He would need to go to the coliseum later, but still had plenty of time. The training grounds were empty now, his siblings having gone to sleep. They had been staying up for his sake, and only just got the opportunity to relax. Let's try it now, Priscilla. The most exciting thing he had gained from his transformation was his lightning affinity, and he was eager to see how it performed. The fastest way he could learn to do it himself, was to let Priscilla use his body then imitate it. It had worked for most things thus far, and now his connection was even stronger. Finally, I am able to use my magic again. She was excited, too much so. She was so different from what she had been like, seeming to adopt more of his personality. There was a small worry in the back of his head that she would change completely, lose her identity because of his actions. He knew the importance of freedom and didn't want to take that away from her. He made a mental note to keep an eye on her condition, but relinquished control of his body to become an observer for this next part. Priscilla eagerly took control of his body, and she seemed better at using it after the fusion. Unable to do anything but watch, he couldn't help but be awed by her control of his energy. She was far better than she had been, and he knew that he paled in comparison. Although, the fact that he could observe what she was doing now, he believed he could imitate her to some extent. Shifting his attention to the energy itself, he watched as it started vibrating, crashing against itself rapidly. It kept speeding up, and he didn't understand what this was meant to accomplish. Then it happened, and for the briefest moment, a flash of light erupted between some of his energy, a strangely quiet blast of thunder following it. It filled Priscilla with excitement, and he could see more flashes of light starting to sprout around him. It kept expanding, the lines of light growing bigger and branching off like real lightning as it moved further away from him. He was left with the image of his body standing amidst a tempest of lightning, all the while smiling pleasantly. Mash's curiosity got the better of him, and he took back control of his body from Priscilla, trying to mimic what she had done before. Priscilla relented, eager to watch him repeat her actions. At first, he started failing, but that changed as Priscilla guided him. He was still in charge of his body, and even the energy itself, but he was able to let himself be guided by her intentions. She was controlling his energy, through guiding his mind like a second brain. Following her instructions was easy, and before long the tempest of lightning was under his control, and he felt himself grow more excited. The energy swirling around him seemed to be influencing his own thought process. The earrings kicked in though, and he felt a soothing force roll across his mind. With the little control he managed to regain, he tried manipulating the lightning separate from how Priscilla was guiding him. Slowly the tempest grew smaller, until it became more like a coating for his body. Then he raised his palm forward, aiming across the training grounds. Lightning launched outwards. He expected a straight line, a singular flash of light. What he got instead was a branching tree of lightning that merely originated from his palm. The flash of light was much brighter this time, and the subsequent thunder shook the ground beneath him. Laughing giddily, he couldn't believe what he was doing right now. It was actual lightning magic, and with no class for it. There is more to be done. Relieved to hear Priscilla's voice sounding more normal, he followed her new instructions. He called them instructions, but they felt more like guidelines that he could see. As he copied her intentions, he realized that this was what they wanted the whole time. He was able to follow her instructions without delay, with perfection, while still being in control of his body. It still took up a significant amount of his concentration, but that would hopefully change with practice. It was what they wanted. He could replicate Priscilla's greater mana control. Now he just needed to perfect it. He followed the next set of instructions he received, growing a wooden replica of Priscilla above him, connected by wood to his back. It happened far faster than he could have managed on his own, but Priscilla wasn't done there. That was too simple, and he was made to vibrate the mana within the wooden creation. She had made a space within the creature for this express purpose. He watched as the flash of light erupted within the wooden casing, bits of wood cracking like glass when lightning branched through it. Finally, he opened the mouth of the wooden replica, and lightning launched outwards, branching everywhere in front of it. Pieces of rubble and dirt, the weapons against the wall in the distance, and Mash himself were struck by bolts of lightning. Pain shot through his back, but he was able to ignore it, far too excited at what he had just done. That was Priscilla's attack, the one she used to devastate their fight before. The power was a lot lower now, but it was the same attack. Mash thought that he would kiss Priscilla if that was possible, but settled for laughing like a maniac. Priscilla scoffed at his thoughts, the gesture coming from her like a message would. It was a human gesture, far more than anything she had done before. What's happening to you? Why are you more human? He couldn't hide his fears from her anymore, so she was aware of what he meant by his question. Do not worry. During the fusion, I was suffused with your memories and emotions, they flooded my mind, altering it. It should have been the same for you, but you prevented it somehow. Priscilla didn't sound the least bit bothered by what had happened. If anything, she seemed happy with the changes. It was the earrings. I think they stopped your memories and emotions from altering my mind. Even as he responded, he realized why she was so excited. They were more of a singular being now. Before there had been the possibility of his betrayal. Mash could have killed Priscilla for levels, or another reason, but now it would do a significant amount of damage to his mana core and mind if he did that. However, he had gained more control over their connection in the process, not to mention the greater changes that Priscilla had experienced. She was more human now, which was reassuring to Mash, especially since it happened due to his thoughts and memories. Mash continued with his practice, trying to form larger bolts of lightning. This time he made sure to avoid his back. Feeling something enter his mana territory, he stepped to the side and dodged what looked to be a book. The pages flapping wildly as they flew past him. Turning his head, he saw his brother standing there with everyone else. Their faces told Mash that they were conflicted about something, though he couldn't figure out what. What are you doing? Arthur spoke for the group, and they all seemed to fall behind him slightly. Lightning magic. Here, let me. Mash started speaking proudly, excited to share his findings with them. Why? His brother interrupted Mash, and Mash believed that it was out of surprise. Well, Priscilla can show. He started explaining how he was doing the magic but trailed off as he processed Arthur's question. He wasn't left in silence though, Luna picking up where his brother had left off. Look, Mash, I'm glad that you figured something out, but can't it wait until the sun is up? I mean, How could you think it was a good idea to fire lightning off while everyone was still sleeping? Despite her words, she was smiling slightly, obviously happy for Mash. That made him feel a little worse, and he apologized to them profusely. Despite their reactions, they wanted to see him use lightning, and he gave them a demonstration firing a blast away from their group. His attacks didn't seem to branch backwards, which he knew from his testing earlier. They got bored relatively quickly, exhaustion having won out over excitement. He was beginning to feel it too, and the hunger he had managed to push off earlier was a much more pressing concern now. Mash stopped his training for the morning, gorging himself on whatever the butler could prepare, eating until he felt full. He ate quickly, wanting to get some sleep before heading to the coliseum. It wasn't hard to fall asleep, and he quickly embraced its nothingness. He woke up later than normal, several hours after everyone else. Unable to remember the last time he woke up so late, he rushed to get ready. It was past lunchtime now, so he ate a catch-up meal, before leaving for the coliseum. Jill and Luke joined him for the trip. They wanted to see what it was like too, though he was the only one planning on registering today. He was a little surprised when his brother didn't protest the decision. Arthur warned him that it would be dangerous but told him that it should be fine considering his strength. With his brother's permission, Mash openly strolled towards the arena. He was glad that he didn't need to go against his siblings yet. It wasn't hard to find the Coliseum, its white walls stood out from all the other buildings. Not to mention it was several times larger than the surrounding structures. White pillars rose into the sky, each was connected by stone, making the structure look more like a circular fence than a building. Though he could make out windows and entrances that identified it as such, and knew that it was indeed the Coliseum. It matched the description perfectly. There was a surprising amount of people waiting to enter. He didn't head to the main line though, having learned that there was a separate entrance for those who wanted to fight. This line was non-existent, not a single person stood before what looked like a registration desk. That was surprising considering the beauty of the lady who stood behind it. It was obvious that she was given the position for her charisma. Mash didn't know what to think about that but approached the desk anyways. This was the path he was set on. Chapter 68, The Rise of Mash. Registration had been easy, and he was surprised to find himself with a fight scheduled for later today. The attendant at the desk was more than a little eager to sign him up for a fight. Going so far as to give him a better deal than what most people would get. From Jack's words, he had known what to expect from the registration, but that was thrown out the window by their first offer. Instead of the typical 5-fight obligation, he only needed to make one for 3 fights. Furthermore, on top of the gold reward, he would be able to register for more fights on an individual basis. That was normally something only the top 50 fighters usually got. He would like to have not known the reason, but the lady behind the desk made no effort in hiding it. His family had risen to prominence quickly, and now a secret sibling had arrived. One who hid his face behind a mask and had not participated in any social events yet. The lady went so far as to improve his deal more, if he fought without the mask. He refused that for now, deciding to leave it as an option for the future. Apparently, his legend was growing without him doing anything, but now he would give them a reason to deserve the legend. The rest of the day couldn't go by fast enough, his fight being the last of the day. He sent a messenger to Arthur, wanting to watch some of the other fights himself as preparation. The Coliseum itself was far more elaborate on the inside than it first looked. As he made his way towards one of the open seats, he looked over the ring of seats and rooms that hung over the floor. His seat was among the common people, and was several levels above the arena proper. There were several buildings that looked more like homes than observation platforms, and he could see several people watching from each of those structures. Rows of seats filled the walls, even surrounding the rooms and buildings that were obviously designated for nobles, or people of great wealth. There was even a section designated for the top fighters. There were ranking fights that would happen regularly. Many adventurers chose to live as gladiators. Ranking fights were just as popular as those with monsters, despite not being to the death. The diverse and intelligent combat made up for a lack of viscera, and that was the most interesting fight he saw. It had been between a fire mage who could temporarily turn his body into the element, and a summoner who summoned a type of shelled creature. It had many legs, and a singular large claw from which it shot bursts of water. They traveled quickly, tearing up stone and dirt where they hit. Mash foolishly thought that the summoner would win but was quickly proven wrong. The fire mage was more skilled, and his movement was unmatched by anything the summoner could attack with. After toying with the summoner's beast for a little bit, the fire mage ended the fight with an attack of overwhelming power. Initially, it looked like the summoner had been burned to a crisp, but as the fire dissipated the summoner looked fine. A bubble shield having encased him in a protective shell. He thought that the fight would continue, but the shield was an indicator of the fight's end, and the fire mage's victory. Watching the fights, he realized that he was several times stronger than the other adventurers at his own rank. It's not that there were no good fighters, it was just that they lacked the same level of raw power as him. Out of the 10 fights he saw, 2 of the adventurers had died. One lacked any real defenses, and a single lucky hit from the monster had ended his life. The other loss was grimmer, the fighter having seemed defeated before the fight even began. It made him a little sick to consider what had happened, and large portions of the audience seemed equally disturbed. The fighter had either killed himself or been coerced into a hopeless fight. Either way, it left a bad taste in his mouth, and many of those in the audience shared his discomfort. Despite the deaths, he was still unafraid of his coming fight. With Priscilla's lightning, and improved mana control, he was simply able to use more powerful magic more quickly. Though this did make him come to a different decision. He would save one of his magics for the tournament. He would have 2 fights against monsters before the first tournament round and should be fine with either lightning or wood. Most likely wood, since lightning worked better as a surprise attack. He would only be fighting monsters within his rank for the first 2 rounds, only moving up a rank for the last fight, so he should be able to manage those fights with his wood magic alone. It was what he was more familiar with anyways. He thought about forming a firmer strategy, but he had no idea of the type of monster he would be fighting. His best bet, and the one he would go with, was one big opening attack, hoping that it would be enough to kill whatever monster he was up against. Based on the monsters he had seen thus far, it would have worked against most of the monsters. There was one abomination of fire and earth, which might have been able to resist the attack, but even then it was unlikely. It seemed like the monsters of his rank lacked a firm defense, that those of the higher ranks all seemed to possess. That told him that monster probably received a natural magic defense at higher levels. Knowing that monsters didn't have levels, he was surprised to hear the announcers rank them with such. He was of iron rank, which meant that he would fight monsters from level 30 to 59. The next rank up was from 60 to 100, and essentially just followed adventurer ranks. It seemed like they had a method to approximate a monster's level. He guessed that it was an identification skill, that translated their power levels according to rules of the class system. It didn't really matter to him, and he lazily watched the remainder of the fights. As it approached his turn, he headed out of the coliseum, and back towards the fighter entrance. He was going to go after the next fighter and may have left earlier than strictly necessary. Excitement made him want to leave. He thought about which attack would leave the biggest impression, especially considering the fights thus far. Most fighters of his rank were capable with weapons, and some even had powerful magic. Though none could match his size and creation speed, and decided that was what he would demonstrate. Priscilla eagerly agreed with the idea, glad to finally be able to demonstrate their superior ability. Grinning, he donned the lower portion of his mask. He decided that he would wear his full mask for this fight, the complete visage being far more intimidating than just the top portion. Honestly, he would have been most intimidating if he removed the top part completely, but wanted to keep his face hidden for now. Although, he did remember that he needed to change it slightly to fit his new eyes. He did so as he walked, changing the eye crystal into identical triangles, by growing the wood over them so that the visible portions would match. The attendant whom he met earlier, was standing by the entrance. Noticing him approach, she gave him a sultry smile, and he was doubly grateful to the mask he was wearing. She led him towards the arena, giving him some perfunctory information. Despite engaging in the conversation, he barely knew what he was saying. Stepping onto the opening platform, he realized he couldn't recall a single thing from their conversation. It didn't bother him much, as the ceiling over him opened up slightly. As the first drop of rain fell on him, he realized that hadn't been paying much attention to his surroundings. He had been finalizing his plans with Priscilla and didn't notice that he descended beneath the arena. Looking back, he realized that it was long ramp that he had walked down, and he waved at the attendant as the platform began to rise. It rose slowly and he could vaguely make out an announcer introducing him. There had only been an announcer for the ranking battle thus far, a different person having revealed the levels of the monsters. So this was a little strange, especially considering the amount of information that the announcer had. At level 40, the 14-year-old child of mystery rises to the challenge. The famed brother of the newest Sentinel Arthur, and the blessed daughter Lunaria. Will he prove himself as a member of the family, or is he the runt of the family? This fight will prove that, as he challenges a stone lizard from the salt lakes of the east. At level 51 the creature is over 10 levels above the boy, and he arrogantly asked for an even stronger opponent next time. The announcer's voice boomed over the stadium, and it made the platform that he stood on tremble from the sound. The announcer was skilled at riling up the audience, though Mash had never spoken to the man or of fighting a stronger monster next time. Although he didn't care much, and he wasn't really worried about the monster either. Priscilla had guided him on the strength of monsters as they observed the previous fights, and they realized that the scale itself was flawed. Monsters grew significantly at the rank transitions, but within ranks their strengths were similar. That was not even to mention that it was incorrect in its assessment most of the time. Priscilla figured that she would be ranked over level 100, though she had lost to their group easily enough. Although her strength was dependent on the number of bodies she possessed. It proved to him the worthlessness of gauging a monster's strength based on level, it could only be estimated properly by their abilities. As he finally reached the stadium, he was a little surprised to see that the rain had picked up. The rest of the stadium was protected from the weather, but the arena itself was open to shower. It poured down on him, and he let the cold water roll down his skin. It felt good and drowned out the cheering of the audience and the voice of the announcer. That alone made him enjoy the downpour. He saw the lizard creature in the distance, though it was partially hidden by the gate that restricted it. It was long, with grey skin and stumpy legs, of which it had over 10. He didn't bother counting them, paying more attention to its wide flat face. It had no eyes as far as he could tell, and as it opened its mouth, he noticed layers of pointed teeth. It was thoroughly horrific, and the skin seemed to ripple as it moved. Disgusting as it was, he focused more on what Priscilla was doing. She had already outlined what he needed to do with his energy, preparing to make the creation he wanted in an instant. It was as if she laid down the lines for his magic, and all he had to do was trace them. If he ever strayed too far, Priscilla was able to fill the gaps with her own energy. With all the preparations out of the way, he watched as the gate slowly rose. Before it raised its full height, the lizard thing, squeezed beneath it, rushing him with more speed than he expected. He could vaguely make out the noise of the stadium rising, the announcer seeming to be eagerly talking about the monster. He drowned them out though, using the rain to let him focus on this next moment. In mere moments he formed an enormous dragon maw. It grew out from his back, at first sprouting like a tail until it formed the mouth-like shape and growing. The lizard was large, around his own height, and several times longer than he was tall. Still, it was puny compared to his creation, the rate at which he made it was astonishing, even to himself. The lizard ran at him, either too stupid or confident to realize the hopelessness. Mash controlled the limb, biting into the creature, and tearing up the ground around it as well. In an instant, the fight was over, and he made an unneeded chewing gesture with his creation. The only thing left of the lizard was its tail, and the only thing left making noise was the rain and his wooden teeth crunching away at the lizard's bones. As he felt the rush of a level up, he knew that this was it, a demonstration of his power, of his rise. Chapter 69, The Monster. The silence grew, the crowd still stunned by the fight. Well, he wouldn't really call it a fight, and that was likely the cause of the quiet. The rain drowned out the smallest noises, so it truly felt like not a single word was being said. The announcer was probably struggling to find the right words for this situation. Mash didn't know how to fill the momentary lull, and considered firing lightning off, just to get a reaction from the crowd. But he held himself back, instead, settling his wooden creation down beside him. Only as it landed did he realize how large it really was. The improvement to his creation speed was significant, more than doubling the rate at which he could make things. This structure was over twice his own height, and several times thicker than him as well. It could have easily chomped through several of the lizards. He was surprised to feel that he had gained a level from the monster, the fight having been trivial. It probably meant that he was close to the level up after the previous fight, and this merely carried him over the edge. He was tempted to check his status now, but also wanted to pay attention to what the announcer would say. Though, maybe he wouldn't be saying anything at this rate. Mash hadn't moved from the rising platform that he stood on and knew that it was supposed to lower after the fight, so he simply waited for that to happen. What a display of power! Easily surpassing what those double his level might accomplish, the speed and power he demonstrated eclipsing his peers. Truly a monster in appearance and talent. Looks like we will have to raise the bar for his next fight, which will be 3 days from now. The crowd started cheering finally, though Mash was considering the announcer's words. How did he know of Mash's monstrous appearance? The mask should have hidden the features well. though a more thorough scan of the battlefield told him what the announcer probably saw. The dragon's maw that lay beside him was covered in blood, and more seemed to be seeping out from the sides. Not to mention the remains of the lizard were lying not too far from his as well. The scene probably painted him as a monster more than his appearance had. As the platform lowered back towards the ground, he was a little surprised to see that the attendant from earlier was gone. He somewhat expected her to be in charge of leading fighters to and from the entrance, but he guessed that it wasn't really necessary. It was a straight line in and out, so he couldn't really get lost. Starting to walk out, he checked over his status, a little surprised to see his stats had changed. Name, MASH class, Scale Wood Devourer. Level, 41. Health, 1000/1000. Energy, 1374/1780. Fortitude, 100. Endurance, 71. Strength, 71. Agility, 72. Intelligence, 100/107. Wisdom, 66/68. Charisma, 32/35. Free stats, 5. Skills, Persist, Monowood Creation, Inhuman Hibernation, Mana Territory, Unnatural Monster Core, Inhumanity, Wooden Body, Carnivorous Tree. The improvement to his charisma made sense, given the reaction the audience had to his fight. However, the changes to his mental stats didn't. Thinking about what might have caused the improvement, he realized that it was probably the fusion with Priscilla. It had probably taken the system, or his body, time to adjust to the changes of the connection. He didn't spend long checking his status, his skills remained unchanged from the level up. The attendant from earlier was rushing down the ramp, a little disheveled from something. She seemed startled to see him making his way up and apologized as she ran up to him. "I'm sorry, I didn't think your fight would end so soon, and hadn't been ready." Her voice was still alluring, and he waved off her apology. "It's not a big deal. It's not like I could get lost even if I tried." He tried to give her a smile, taking off the lower portion of his mask so that she could see it. Either the gesture or his words didn't seem to help, and she gave him a very forced chortle in response. Deciding to ignore the awkwardness, he let the lady lead him out of the arena. At the exit of the tunnel, she reminded him that his fight would be in 3 days, and around the same time as today. Giving her a nod of confirmation, he formed a singular wing behind him, raising it above his head to block the rain. His clothes were already wet, so the gesture seemed pointless, but it still felt right. Before the fight, he had made several holes in his shirt, places where he could grow his wooden creations from. He would typically just wear armor, since that would be the easiest for him, but had thought that keeping his normal clothing would add more to the spectacle. At first he had debated whether or not he wanted to make a spectacle of himself, and up until the last moment, he was undecided. The announcer's words before the fight began had helped him make the decision. To some extent, the fight would act as a display of his new family name. The reputation that Alex spoke about was made through moments like that, so he played it up a bit. He wanted the city to know that his family was not one to mess with. The tournament in a few days would do the same. There was a popular cafe nearby, and the others wanted to meet up there after the fight. He thought about what he would do for the next fight and wondered how the owners of the coliseum would raise the difficulty. It was a strange place where the difficulty of the fight fell on the owners. The adventurers were not expected to play up the tension, and an easy fight meant that the administrators had made a mistake. His fight would have demonstrated that all monsters at his rank would be too weak to pose a real threat, which meant that he would probably be facing multiple. From the fights he saw today, only one fight had multiple monsters. And there were only 4 at that. Honestly, he hoped that they would pour out an endless wave of monsters, thinking that he could handle it. With his persist skill, it would only help him level faster. He idly wondered what training would be like tomorrow. Jack certainly would have heard about his fight by then. He spotted the cafe, noticing the obvious symbol that his friends had mentioned. It was a painting of a small blue animal, hung as a sign in front of the building. It had red eyes, and long ears that were far bigger than the rest of the creature. Other than the ears, the creature itself was a small circular ball, with 4 stumpy legs. Mash didn't know how the creature really looked but was able to find out quickly. Upon entering the small cafe, he saw the depicted creature running around on the inside. It waddled more than run, its ears seeming to cause its body to sway with its weight. He guessed it could be considered cute, but to him, it just seemed awkward, and a little sad. His friends were sitting at a big table in the corner, and he made his way towards them. The building was wooden, some simple carpet was laid across the ground. A few paintings were hung on the walls, depictions of people whom Mash did not know. He did recognize the princess on one of the paintings and guessed that they were all depicting members of the royal family. This building wasn't lit with monocrystals either, instead, they used more traditional candles and oil lamps. He didn't know why but enjoyed the ambient light. Monster. He heard the word muttered as he passed a table. Within his mana sense he could tell that they were talking about him and noticed that most of the people were looking at him. It had probably been the same outside. Since he was so close to the coliseum, most of the people here would have heard about or seen his fight. He ignored the comment, somewhat used to the reaction now. Before it had felt wrong, having been about his appearance. Now it felt more appropriate being about his power. Well, what did you guys think? Speaking, he pulled the chair out to sit down. It didn't surprise him to see his brother and sister sitting there, sure that they would have gone to see his fight after receiving his message. It was boring, you should have let the thing hit you or something. Jill spoke, stuffing her face with a cake of some kind. She had really become looser with her money after her family debts had been cleared. It must have been freeing for her, and she took advantage of the large amount of money they still had on them. He rolled his eyes at her, taking a bite out of one of the other cakes on the table. The gesture was hidden by the mask, but she seemed to get it. He needed to stop himself from doing that too much. He did not want to make it into a habit. You did a good job at hiding your real capabilities. Most will be too focused on what you did show, to consider what you didn't. Arthur sounded very pleased with how Mash handled the fight, and told him as much, spending the next few minutes talking about the advantage that would give him for the tournament. Mash knew that as well, having planned on saving his lightning for the tournament. The rest of the meal was pleasant, though it was accented by the whispers of the surrounding people. As they left the building, he looked over the paintings again. He was sure that one was a depiction of the king, and saw another painting of the princesses. Where are Nevis and Amara? He asked the question without thinking about it too much. He was surprisingly used to seeing them with his siblings and figured that they would have come to the fight. They are busy with class advancement but said that they would stop by in a couple of days. Luna cut off Jill, who looked ready to make a wisecrack. Even though the words were unsaid, he knew what she would have said. Though he was able to push the thought aside, processing what Luna had said. So, Nevis had leveled up early, and he wondered what class she received. Did she pick the class related to the mask, or did she have another lined up that was better? The walk back to Arthur's home had been covered in whispers. They couldn't hear them because of the rain, but when it stopped, nothing was covering the mutterings of the crowd around them. At first, Mash made a show of looking towards the sounds, silencing them as he turned his head, but Arthur stopped him, telling him that they would follow him now. As it did for all of them. It would follow their whole group soon since Jill, Red, and Luke had all registered for fights. They got fights for the same day as his next one, and they were already coming up with what they could do to one-up Mash. Arthur told them it would be unnecessary. Jill's magic was extremely rare and would cause a stir no matter what she did during the fight. Red similarly had unique magic, though it would cause a stir for a different reason. Mash was surprised to hear that she decided to fight since she seemed to want to keep her family a secret. He made a note to ask her about it later, and Jill about her family too. That had been pushed back by the recent events, but they had nothing planned for tonight. It would be as good a time as any for the conversation. Chapter 70, Names. When they got back to the mansion, Mash pulled aside his group, letting his siblings go their own ways. The lights were still on, the servants would be preparing dinner. He was unsurprised to see Arthur pick up on the privacy they wanted but expected Luna to be more nosy. Maybe Arthur had told her something, or maybe she just didn't realize what Mash was doing. Follow me, I found a good place to relax at. They followed along, each of them seemed somewhat anxious about the coming conversation. Despite his growing excitement and curiosity, Mash managed to at least pretend to be patient. He did know of a pretty good place for discussions, though it wasn't secret at all. There was a small annex in the garden, just big enough for one small dining table. He had caught his sister out there a few times, mainly drinking tea or reading a book. It was quite nice, and the crystalline design of the top made it so that one could see clearly with only moonlight. They were cut much like gems of his mask and absorbed light to make it shine a little brighter. The annex was simple otherwise, a wooden platform that was elevated slightly, and 4 pillars supported the roof from the perimeter of the base. The design was especially good for days like this. With the rain no longer falling, the air was left with a cool breeze that felt pleasant as it washed over his face. Before sitting down, he rubbed his hand against the chair to feel for the water. The wood felt cool, but not wet, and he happily took a seat. The others did likewise, checking their own seats before sitting down. Without asking for it, the head butler came out with a tray of different drinks. There were a few bottles of wine and 2 teapots. This tea will help you relax, and this other will do the opposite, keeping you awake and refreshing you. Food will be out shortly, but your brother, the young lord, requested this be brought out immediately. As he spoke he waved his hands over the 2 teapots, indicating what each did. Furthermore, they were color-coded, the blue being the first, and the red being the second. Arthur had sent it out, though Mash didn't think this discussion would be very stressful. This preparation would have been better for the previous one. Oh! I think Arthur thinks this will be like last time. When the realization hit him, Mash shared his thoughts with his friends. They nodded along, and Red thanked Alfred as he left. Well, I guess I owe you guys some explanation. Especially, since it got pushed back for so long. Jill still sounded a little reluctant, as if her family's situation hadn't just been fixed. You know, it really isn't fair. I get to hear bits of exciting stories and mysterious families, but my parents are just leather workers. So please do share, let me partake in some more excitement, our lives are rather boring now. Luke was surprisingly apt at using sarcasm, breaking his usually more reserved nature. It had gotten worse after the stuff with Leah, and Mash was glad to see him relaxing more. While it didn't do much to curb Mash's excitement, it did seem to get Jill to relax. Mash guessed that she had been taking it too seriously and needed someone to remind her to act like she usually did. Fine, but I don't think my family's story is anywhere near as exciting as Mash's dramatic revelation from before. Anyways, it's not such a big deal anymore, but when my mother was younger, she was a famous enchanter here in the capital. So famous in fact, that she got to work on one of the Queen's personal items. Did she fail? Red's question interrupted Jill's story, though it seemed like an automatic response. Jill didn't chastise her like she would Mash, and just continued her story. No, it was the opposite. She succeeded but ended up making a better version soon after. She wasn't planning on selling it, instead, she used it on me. Not much more to the story. The king found out that she used the leftover materials from the first item to make the second and heard that the result had been better. The queen felt cheated and slapped our family with the debt for all the items she used and exiled her from the city. Jill finished her story, and Mash wondered what exactly the item was. He didn't pry about that, certain that Jill would have mentioned it if she wanted. Though there was something else that concerned him. Why doesn't anyone know of your mother then? Mash thought that a famous enchanter, especially one as capable as her mother, would be famous anywhere. Shouldn't she have been able to clear the debt easily? Jill shook her head, a little more sadly than before, but responded to his question anyways. Part of the exile involved removing her name. She was also forbidden from selling her enchantments. It was a mock execution, and before you ask, she was spared because the kingdom might need her later. That was the reason for the debt. If we failed to pay it off, then she would end up working for the king. Though, something must have changed for the king to be willing to drop the debt so easily. Considering Jill's words, Mash was left stumped with what to say. A mock execution was something he had never heard of before. It got him thinking about who else received similar treatment. What kind of people deserved this treatment? He wasn't particularly well versed in history but wanted to check later. If for nothing else, then to satisfy his curiosity. That was for later. He still wanted to ask Red about her fight. Are you seriously going to fight? What about your family? Mash was a bit perplexed by the confusion he saw on Red's face. It seemed like she was expecting something else. Though, she seemed relieved and answered his question. I decided that I would make a name for myself. After seeing your family, and what they have done, I grew a bit jealous. It made me want to try and do the same. So, I won't hide my magic anymore, and work on making my own name define me. There was a glint to her eyes that she didn't have before, a simple shift that defined the seemingly newfound hope. Mash agreed with her sentiment and felt like they were all walking down that path already. Red was separating from her family, and Jill was rebuilding hers. Mash and Luke started from scratch. Well, Luke did. Mash was building on what his siblings had already started. Though he wouldn't be relying on and would add his own contribution soon enough. The tournament was only a few days away, and he was certain to make a splash there. He had been contemplating Red's words and returned to the conversation when the food arrived. They didn't talk about anything important for the rest of the night, instead, they spent the time coming up with ways to make their first fights more exciting. Their plans weren't very good, and despite nobody touching any alcohol, they were coming up with some crazy ideas. He was most excited for Jill's fight, her plan being the most likely to fail. Mash's next fight still wouldn't be that exciting, especially since he still wanted to keep his lightning in reserve until the tournament. Well, he guessed that the excitement of the next fight would depend on what monsters the organizers prepared for him. There was not much night left when they went to bed. They would still need to get up early, otherwise, they would be late for training with Jack. Mash woke up early, but not much earlier than the rest of his friends. They didn't have time for a proper breakfast and needed to get to the guild soon. Mash grumbled something but didn't mind too much. He had kept his ration stockpile full and grabbed some food to eat while he walked. They felt a little bland compared to the meals he was eating as of late and thought that he should consider upgrading his rations. What were fancy rations even going to be like? He heard the whispers more easily now, they buzzed around him like bugs, and there was no rain to drown them out now. His friends didn't seem bothered by it, but they had glared at some of the more unpleasant comments. Getting to the guild was a huge relief, but the whispers followed him inside. He had expected the other adventurers to be different, but he heard the same words thrown around in here. He even heard a few people talking about how the fight must have been rigged. That was clearly said so that it could be heard, meant to get under his skin. It succeeded, and he decided that he wouldn't take it. Within his mana territory, he could tell that the man who spoke was weaker than him, at least as far magic was concerned. So, Mash brazenly grabbed the man's shoulder as he walked by, turning him roughly to face Mash. His friends seemed a little stunned, and he wished that he had given them some warning. The man before him had oddly spiky yellow hair, and Mash wondered what the purpose of such ugly hair was. It stuck out more than his scales would have, and he felt somewhat bad for the man. That must have been the result of a class. Say that again. Mash had started the confrontation only to realize he didn't know what to do. So, he gave him the best glare he could manage, but it did nothing as he was still wearing his mask. It wasn't that he forgot the mask, he just kind of hoped it wouldn't matter. The man's nonchalant response made it clear that Mash's intent didn't get through to the man. What? You mean about how your fight was fixed? I mean it's only fair, you really should tell us how you managed to bribe the organizers. The man spoke louder than before, some of the other adventurers started listening in with curiosity. Mash was more distracted by the man's voice itself. It was a little nasally and extremely haughty, obviously trying to convey his arrogant superiority. Mash didn't bother thinking about his words, instead of letting his lips loose. I'm in the tournament next week. Join if you can, back up that pathetic attitude. We will see just how fixed the fight really was. He managed to keep his voice contained. The anger was there, but he did not speak loudly, his voice contained a much colder fury. As he said the last part, he looked over the entire crowd, letting them know it was not meant only for this man. The guild wanted him to become a spectacle, and he wanted it too. Well, he was doing a good job at setting the stage. With his little tirade done, he pushed through the crowd, heading towards their usual training spot. Do you need a moment, or can we make fun of you now? I mean I don't want you to explode like that on me. It was hard for her to speak, Jill was struggling to contain her laughter. She still managed a quip, and the others started chuckling too. At least she waited until they were out of earshot of the other adventurers. The color that was certainly touching Mash's face was hidden behind his mask, but his friends seemed able to read his embarrassment anyways. It wasn't that bad. He thought about what he said. Okay, so it was a little awkward, but it had worked well enough. Not to mention, he managed to play up the tournament significantly. The guild would be happy about that. Though Jill didn't seem like she would let him live it down, and he paled a little at her next words. Just wait till Luna hears.